I'm Lindsay Knisely, and I teach for the writing program and for Oaks College. And I particularly teach Oaks Core, Oaks Academic Success, Oaks Mentoring, and Writing 2. I try and have a really strengths-based pedagogy where I think about, for individual students, what are they best at and how can we kind of use that to enhance their learning, and also for the group itself. So I have to get to know the group, which is why a small class size is so important, and the kind of group dynamics, and think about what's going to work best for this group. So sometimes that's a lot of small group work, for example. In a class that's more hesitant about talking. Sometimes it's breaking through some of the barriers in the student's own resistance to talking in large group by asking some unusual or maybe, questions that disrupt the regular flow of things. I try and pull those out every once in a while. I also do a lot of collaborative learning in the classroom. That's one of my most important things, I think, is for students to learn from one another and to work together to achieve the various learning goals. I tend to be encouraging and use humor a lot, but also to hold high expectations for my students, and to say, I know you can do this, or I know you can achieve these goals. I've read your writing, so I know you're a strong writer. I know you're capable of this phenomenal thinking. Let's hear more of that in the classroom. I find it surprising that there's public outcry about the quality of student writing when I think there should be far more public outcry about the limited resources available to teachers of writing. That to me seems like where our disgust should lie. So I would say I see and read and report on a lot of student writing, and overall I'm really impressed by the dedication and the work that students are putting into their writing. Not everyone across the board, but I see a lot of hardworking student writers, and I see incredible change and growth in students over the course of a quarter. So that shows me that there's great potential in these student writers, that if you can get them the tools and the inspiration that they need, they can become better writers over a short period of time, and it is a goal of theirs. So I think it's really unfortunate that so much funding has been lost for programs like the tutoring that used to be available, which was much more widely funded several years ago, and that's really changed in the past few years. So for example, all our unsatisfied Oaks Core students used to have a writing tutor that they met with outside of class, sometimes once a week, and that is gone now. So that kind of resource, that peer-to-peer learning, is just completely gone. Something that I've had to do, partly in response to the lack of tutoring, is that I've instituted writing groups. So writing groups have been a really key tool for me in reaching the most students in the most effective way possible. So I meet with students in small groups, and then they read their essays out loud, and then we do a writing workshop in class where the students themselves give feedback on their peers' papers, and we have a discussion about the paper out loud, where we discuss what are the strengths. We always start with that, and then what could the student work on in terms of for revising the paper next time. And I've had enormous success with these. Students really love writing groups because they can get immediate feedback on a paper, and because they can learn very quickly the language and vocabulary of helping one another become better writers, and then they internalize that process for themselves, so they learn how to be a better editor of their own writing when they're editing their peers' work. So they'll say, oh, I like what you did in the conclusion of this paper. It seems like you really brought all the ideas together, but you also added a new concept. That worked really well. Maybe go back and add some analysis in your earlier paragraphs. So they learn quickly, and they kind of reflect back the language that I use when talking about papers. And so it becomes another step in collaborative learning. And that's been a great success for me. I think that for large lecture classes, I think shorter, more in-depth writing assignments are good. I think we have this idea in our head that a paper has to be a certain number of pages, but I've seen students really get into great analysis and real critical thinking in shorter assignments that are given more frequently. So that's a possibility. Some people do the thing where they have a kind of additive paper where you write several short responses and then you turn that into one longer paper. I think, again, making use of TAs, I think thinking about collaborative learning as one of the most effective ways that students can learn, having them learn from one another. So exchanging papers in class, giving feedback on a classmate's paper, even if it's a 2-page response paper, they've done that thinking, analysis, and writing, and then they put their editorial hat on and are really able to look at a classmate's paper and evaluate it in terms of use of sources, analysis, conclusion, etc. So I would just post a list of the most important elements in each essay and have the students do some of their own peer feedback. Many of the prompts that I use for my writing assignments themselves are come right out of the discussions we've had. So I'll change prompts, not use the same prompts every year, because I want the essays to be an extension of our in-class conversation. So I think paying really careful attention to what are the questions that really ignited conversation among your students, and writing those down, keeping a list of those, and then reframing them as essay prompts later to continue the conversation. I want to try to lock into a passion that the student may have. So it's related to the course material, but it's also related to student interest, and it's also often related to their experience. In our core course, we're talking about social justice and race, gender, and how these topics interplay in the students' lives themselves. So I'll ask a question in an essay prompt like, how did you learn to be masculine? Or what does masculine mean to you? Or explore your own experience in terms of how gender and culture intersect for you as a person or in your life. So I really want to get to a topic that the students themselves, that they're really passionate about. So I write personal prompts, but I also request that the students bring in the course materials, the text that we're reading, into this kind of glorious interplay of some of their own experience, but then a lot of them extending beyond that experience to a more critical analysis. But using their lives as a text has been really effective for me, especially in teaching core. I like to democratize the classroom more than that, so that it's not just my voice speaking, but also so that there can be more of a dynamic flow back and forth between students and teacher and between the students themselves. So I often will have students call on one another in the classroom to try and move their focus away from pleasing the teacher or having it be all about my feedback on each individual student's comments. I want them to look at one another, to think about the other students in the classroom as their audience. If they're trying to convince or persuade someone of something, either something that they're speaking about, or when they're writing their argument essays for my class, I want them to think about who's their audience, what are the needs of that audience. So that's partly how a public speaking element comes into play in the class as well. But just to sort of decentralize the authority in the classroom a little bit, and have that be a more shared power for the students, because I think students, especially first generation college students, tend to experience the classroom as a place where they have felt or feel powerless. So I want to bring that element of power back to them, so they can feel like the classroom belongs to all of us and belongs to them as a shared space for learning about what they're interested in learning about. And that's been a fun thing about teaching my Writing 2 course. I've seen students really respond to the work that they do with E², so with Engaging Education, which is all student-run, student-led outreach and retention and support program. So E² runs a class several times a year, and I'm the faculty sponsor for that class, but the students themselves do this incredible transformative work in the class. So not just with outreach and retention for particular groups, which is also going on all the time at E-Squared, but within the class, students do a lot of work with their own, figuring out their identity process, figuring out how their various elements of themselves, culture, family background, race, gender, sexuality, how all of those intersections affect them as people, as students, and as young people who are developing into the best versions of themselves. So I've seen so many students blossom in the E-Squared class, and I think it's an underutilized resource on this campus in terms of not a lot of faculty members know about the work that the students are doing themselves with things like practical activism and engaging education to connect with these ideas that matter most to them in their education. Some students say the E-Squared class is their favorite class they took over all 4 years at UCSC because they really grappled with personal material that mattered most to them, and then they thought about how they could transform that and make a change for themselves.